The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And in John 1:14 it says that the Word that was God became flesh and walked among us. That eternal Word, the eternal Word of God became flesh and walked among us.
Christ is King! Christ is King! Christ is King!
Let all that you do be done in love. A Christian, when they see their society collapsing around them, doesn't cower or run in fear. He doesn't stick his head in the sand and hope that it will all change and just go away and be all right. He doesn't throw up his hands and say all is lost. A true man, when he sees a challenge, he rises to the challenge. He digs deep within his own soul to find the strength to do what is necessary to meet the challenge in front of him. And this is what as Christians we are called to do. That means that when we see our society collapsing around us, we don't run away, we don't go and join the opposition as Andrew Tate did. We don't despair. No, as Christians, we stand up for that which is good and true and noble. The tutelage of our Lord Jesus Christ calls us to bear our cross and to suffer in his way.
How the debate was going to go, it just went played.
So who's doing the timing, sorry?
And were you okay on the theme that we discussed last time?
Yes, the Christian critique of the Communist Manifesto.
That's what we were going to do, yeah. That's what we were
So I prepared my Christian critique of the Communist Manifesto.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and then we're going to have
it this morning.
And then we're going to have. I've listened to it a couple of times.
Okay.
And then we're going to do another debate where you're going to give a communist critique of the Sermon on the Mount.
Not today, though.
Not today.
We'll do that
another time.
Yeah.
So it's going to be 3 minutes, 3 minutes. And what I'd like you to do,
I think maybe a little bit longer, no?
three. You want to? Well, 3 minutes, but backwards and forwards for 40 minutes.
Yeah, but as a starter, I think maybe 10 minutes each.
10 minutes. Oh, bro.
So
have you prepared like a 10 minute?
I haven't prepared anything.
So can we do four? All right, I'll meet you in the middle. Meet in the middle. 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Okay.
Backwards and forwards. 4 minutes.
Again and again.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Backwards and forwards. Backwards and forwards. Since I'm the prosecution, kind of makes sense. I go first because you're defending.
Okay.
I'm attacking.
Okay.
Yeah, so it makes sense that
I didn't realise I was defending. But anyway, yeah, well, I suppose I am.
I'm critiquing the Communist Manifesto.
Sorry,
you're
okay,
defending
right.
the Communist
Sorry.
Manifesto.
I mean, trial, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'd like, could you stand in front of us? And what I'd like, brother, is for you to count me down. So count your fingers. And
4 minutes.
3 minutes. So 3, 4,
You get like
2,
10, 15 seconds
1.
to close.
Yeah, and then let me know when there's like 30 seconds. 10 seconds and that like that. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Shall I go?
Here we are, Bob.
Right.
Shake hands.
Yeah.
May the best or the worst man win.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
Or neither.
Okay.
May the argument advance.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before we start the clock, the thing that we're debating is a Christian critique of the Communist Manifesto. So I'm going to be giving my critique of the Communist Manifesto. Heiko's going to be defending the Communist Manifesto. And it's up to you to decide who has made the stronger argument. And for you to decide which one you want to believe in. Yeah? But just before we get going, can I just have a show of hands? Who here is an out-and-out communist? Who here is an out-and-out Christian? Yay! All right, I think I've got the home advantage.
Oh, okay.
Right? Okay. Well, who here's neither? There we go. Sam's got his hand up. Sam, I know Sam's a Muslim. Madam, what are you? Indecided. What are you, sister?
Yeah,
nothing. Nothing. Okay. So we've got a couple of nuns. We've got a couple of nuns. We got a Muslim, and the rest of you, majority of you are Christians. And we're going to debate in Christian critique of the Communist Manifesto. So are we ready to begin? Yeah. So I'll go first. From my first word.
Stable, is that stable? Wobbler.
Yeah. Yep, that's good. Okay, from my first word. Are you ready?
Yep.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the first critique of the Communist Manifesto that I want to offer to you is this. I'm going to offer a series, but they're basically to acknowledge that communism talks about a real issue. a real issue of economic justice, which as a Christian, I completely agree with. There's a real question of economic justice that faces us all as a society and as a civilization. However, communism gives an analysis of this economic paradigm, or rather it gives an economic paradigm to this injustice that rests upon certain conditions that as a Christian I believe are fundamentally wrong. Marx in his philosophy built his philosophy on a Feuerbackian materialism. The idea that the world is simply a material existence and that there is nothing outside of materialism, and that all such things that are outside of materialism are mere projections of our minds. However, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to demonstrate to you very clearly that this is false. The laws of mathematics are independent from our mind. They exist in nature. Childhood development shows that children learn to count even before they're 1 year old by their encounter with nature. It is their encounter with nature that allows them to begin to lay the foundations of mathematics in their psychology. And the laws of mathematics are independent of our reasoning or ability. We see mathematics in the universe. We encounter it in the universe. The distance between the Earth and the Sun would still be the same, regardless of whether anyone was there to identify it. Maths is a code breaker, a code that we have used to break into the mathematics of the universe. And that mathematics describes the universe to the nth degree. Mathematics, along with the values that you live by. How many minutes, bro? Mathematics, along with things like values, like love, like emotions, are all things that govern our lives that are non-material in nature, but they are realities. The laws of logic being another one. We encounter these realities and we work with these realities to organize our society, to organize our lives. But Feuerbach says that these things don't exist, that they're merely things that you imagine. Things that you imagine are not regular, they are subjective, but maths is regular, and so it is not our imagination that makes it, as the universe is regular. And if Feuerbach was wrong about materialism, then Karl Marx was wrong about materialism, because Karl Marx applies Hegelian philosophy to Feuerbackian materialism. If Feuerbach was wrong about materialism, it follows that Marx was wrong in his assessment about his economic evaluation of how the world works and how we ended up in this mess that he describes in the Communist Manifesto. So that's my first critique.
Thank you very much.
Over to you. Sorry.
Well, I must thank Bob for for constantly plaguing me to engage in debate, and two, for the sophisticated argument that he just made. The starting point, if you like, for the scientific reference, which Bob just made, was about mathematics. And I'd first of all like to address that question. Mathematics, although it appears to be, if you like, one of the fields in which man has been able to understand the natural world in a far more precise fashion, in actual fact, mathematics is not pure science. Mathematics is approximation to the world around you. I do not believe what you said is correct, that children automatically produce mathematical mind. Instead of, these human beings have evolved an ability to approximate their analysis of the world by means of analysing things in relation to their fingers. The reason why we count in tens and in numbers of 10 is because we've got 10 fingers, or better said, 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. There is one tribe in the world, however, which counts in 20s. And that's because they don't have any shoes. And therefore their approximation is based upon their analysis of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What Marx argued philosophically is what the question that you've been addressing is: when we approximate to reality with mathematics, that we are not actually examining reality. Instead of this, we're coming close to it. So there isn't actually any object that is exactly the same as another object. By using mathematics, we approximate the reality of the world. It allows us to estimate, it allows us to calculate, it allows us to build, it allows us to engage in scientific thought, but it is not exact reality. It is an approximation to that reality. I can show this to you because if you ask the question, what is pi? Pi by definition, I used to know a guy, Eric at Speaker's Corner, he could reel off about 20 numbers of pi. But pi continues forever. It has no final answer. In mathematics, this is the simple reality that although for approximations purposes, mathematics can be used to enable us to navigate the world, like all scientific ideas, including Marxism, by the way, it does not mean that it is reality. Feuerbach, who you mentioned earlier, as a precursor idea to Marx's ideas, and a contemporary of Marx, Feuerbach said, to come on to the Christian question, man first shapes a piece of wood and then bows down and worships their own creation. So man is the creator of God and creates God, according to Feuerbach, in the image of the spirit of the positive elements within the religion. This could be applicable, by the way, to the Muslim religion, to Christianity, and to most of the human religions around the world, which are the product of the congregation of man in attempting to understand their human emotions and the dynamics of the universe around them. That's enough for now.
I always enjoy debating Heiko. It's a great speaker, very eloquent. This is how Speaker's Corner should have always been. It's a shame it's been dragged down. This is the kind of debates that we should be having. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to just address some of, can you show me? Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah. So I just want to respond to some of what he said and then advance my argument. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, Heiko doesn't appreciate the power of mathematics. The power of mathematics is such, ladies and gentlemen, that we can describe things to a point of decimalization that you cannot even conceive, to the millionth of millionths of places. And we can describe things exactly in such astrology using mathematical formulas that they predict things before we observe them, meaning that we are encountering maths in the universe. It's good that he referenced pi, because pi is a perfect example. Pi describes a non-existent reality, a perfect circle. We've never seen a perfect circle, and yet we discovered pi as something, as an abstract reality, an infinite reality, a non-material reality, that through the use of pi we are able, it appears all over astrophysics, in countless theories of astrophysics, essential to how your satellites work and why your mobile phone works, ladies and gentlemen. Meaning that mathematics is describing something otherworldly, not of this world. It points to something non-material. Ladies and gentlemen, man worships out of awe. Man worships because when he looks at the stars pour forth speech that man is the creation of a creator. It is the glory of the cosmos that draws man into worship. That is why man worships, because awe is programmed into our nature. Awe is something that the God who created us put there, so that when we see the sky full of the stars of the Milky Way and that wisp of the clouds of the heavens, our spirits and our minds are lifted above the want of food to think to something higher, that maybe there is a God, maybe there is a purpose for my life. That is why he fashions the wood to offer it to his maker. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to advance my criticism by stating this, that Marx does not understand human nature. Marx believes that you are all blank slates and that your society fashions your being. Now, to some degree, I agree with Marx, because my position is not entirely different. I agree with Marx that the sheet of paper that we are born with is largely blank. But upon that sheet of paper is written a single sentence: be selfish. Human beings are born with selfishness. It's in our blood, like awe is in our blood. This nature distorts our world and distorts our activism and life, including how we behave economically. And it is out of that selfishness that economic injustice arises.
I will also address, I mean, we're kind of addressing each other's questions, so I'll do the same again. The ability to predict things is ingrained in the very nature of science. If you want to be able to understand whether you've worked something out accurately or approximated something relatively accurately, then you must be able to, on the basis of your observations, make a prediction about what might happen. Now, precisely because we are approximating rather than describing exactly what happens, there's always going to be a certain error within the discovery of science. And we've had a lot of that over the last few years. People claiming they know science, people claiming the science leads their pathway, and yet in reality, they led us up the garden path and led millions of people or billions of people towards a despair, destruction of their lives, and even the destruction of individual lives through you know what. Now, in relation to mathematics and abstraction, abstraction is the nature of man. We look at something, and when we use a word, just as when we use fingers for mathematical understanding, when we use words, we're abstracting. Bob is an abstraction of what Bob is, because Bob himself is not a fixed entity. He is coming into being and passing away just as I am. 80 years ago I wasn't alive, and in 80 years time I will not be alive. And therefore Heiko Khoo is something that is come into being in 1963 and will pass away, hopefully not by 2024. But at a certain stage I will pass away. Therefore it's an abstraction about something in permanent motion. Anything that is in permanent motion and transformation from one form to another form, from inanimate to animate, animate to inanimate, by definition is in transformation and can only be viewed in motion as an abstraction. So then we come on to the question of human nature. I do not believe there is a fixed and frozen human nature. Human behavior changes according to conditions. However, there are certain elemental forms of human behavior related to the existence of the species. We are social animals, like our precursors, the apes. We are social animals. We live in social environments. We have language, created, by the way, as a tool, as a product of tool making itself. When human beings produced the first sticks and shaped the first stones in order to navigate the environment and escape from the conditions in Africa, move along the rivers, using stones that they had shaped with their hands, they were able to navigate and live in environments and climates that were impossible for the other apes to exist in. In that way, we carved out the world today. The world today, I would argue, is created by the human action and labor with tools. We made the world around us and made the church and made the Bible and made religions and made bombs and made weapons and made food and made technology, made computers, made videos and so on. We produced the wealth around us. The problem is that mankind does not control what they do with their hands and their brains. Their hands and brains are instead not controlled by God, but controlled by those who own the tools which we work on to produce the wealth in the world.
It's getting slippy. If I can see the clock, bro. Or just count it down. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Heiko is as articulate and as entertaining as ever. We love him. But ladies and gentlemen, let me just point out something to you. Since the scientific method was the development of the Christian church, let me explain to you what it assumes but never proves. It has never been proven that there is an ordered universe that repeats under a system of laws. Christians assumed that because they believed in a creator who had an ordered mind, who organized the universe according to reason. And because of that basis began to investigate the natural world. They were called the first natural philosophers. And what did they discover? That indeed, ladies and gentlemen, nature repeats itself according to law. Law indicates a lawgiver. Law indicates a mind. We can describe these laws mathematically, and we do, to a precision that you cannot possibly conceive. To the power of 10 to the 10 to the 30. That is the preciseness of math. You can't even think of that number, it is so great. But that is the precision of mathematics, and it is based upon a Christian assumption of an ordered and reasonable universe that acts according to law. Law described by language, mathematics. Feuerbach was wrong. These are not projections. Heiko is wrong. These are not approximations. They are accurate to a degree. The question is just what kind of degree. It goes on and on and on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Heiko admits when he says that human beings have elemental behaviors. If humanity has elemental behaviors, humanity is not, as the Marxists say, projection. Humanity, if humanity has common elemental behaviors, is object. As object, humanity is reality. He is a real thing, not the creation of environment. You all know this because you're educated in genetics, because you can tell the difference between a human and an ape. Genetics is a hard fact. You can't escape from it. But those genetics wire you to have a sense of values. They wire you to have a sense of awe. They wire you to have a sense of love and affection. These are all non-material realities that govern all of your lives, all of the time. They wire you to think logically and rationally. Therefore, man is object, not abstraction. Furthermore, the reality of man is, and the reason he creates society is because of family, ladies and gentlemen, not because of economic needs. I'll tell you what I would argue is the root of civilization, the love of a mother for her children. at that point, everything else has been built. Women love their children because they are wired to. They find a mate who they believe will look after their children. I'm talking about prehistoric man. And the prehistoric man who could best look after his children was the one that could turn a stick into a stone axe, was the one that could build fire. That's the foundation of civilization. The love of a mother.
Okay. So, when Bob says the family unit is independent of economics, I beg to differ. People who fall in love and get married, they often have, in fact, the marriage contract itself is an economic contract. And even the term that we use in the West to denote family has changed in its meaning over thousands of years. In ancient Rome, when the word family originated, the time of Jesus Christ, or before, a little bit before, in the Latin, the word familia meant a man and his slaves. It did not include his wife. It did not include his children. It was an exclusive property relationship. You could pass on your slaves, and that would be the family. You could not pass on your wife or your children. They were not part of the family. Family has also changed over history. 150 years ago, an extended family with the grandparents, the children, and the grandchildren lived together. In other communities, for example, in Papua New Guinea or in Malaya, in the longhouses, people living collective lives. Often there were, in history, matriarchal or matrilineal communities. In Chinese, the very word for family name is descended of the woman. So there is truth in the idea of the maternal love, because naturally the child comes out of the woman. They have naturally the greater love for the children than a man, in that direct sense. And matrilineal descent also exists in the Jewish community. There are communities, even to this day, that are matriarchal. For example, the Yao tribe in Yunnan province, the Bantu in Africa, and there are many others historically where women have had a higher position than they have today, or a relatively equal position with men. And therefore the family itself, as a unit, has been changed according to certain conditions. What are the conditions? In Tibet, for example, brothers marry one woman. In Tibet, they will marry a woman in common. That is because of an economic function. At that time, in the origin of Tibetan civilization, there was a shortage of women. So they would go and grab a woman and share the woman between two brothers. Human family relations, much as they are hallowed and venerated in human society, are dependent upon economic conditions. And by the way, in the Manifesto of the Communist Party, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, it explicitly deals with this. He said, you accuse us of trying to destroy the family, whereas in actual fact, the working classes, this was in Victorian England, the working classes do not have a family that you are describing. The family you describe is the bourgeois family, the middle and upper class family, where you can open, if in modern day times it would be, you can open a fridge and there's always something in there.
Ladies and gentlemen, at no point did I describe the family. Not at all. Just watch the videos again. All I said was that civilization was created from mother's love. That's what I said. Because that is how civilization formed. A woman would seek her best mate. she would create a mate, and then her matrilineage would go on, and she would seek to create a man that would help to protect her children, and then the men would work together to protect their children. So at the heart of civilization is the mother's love. The Communist Manifesto is the idea. I suppose you could flip it and say the heart of civilization is the sex drive of men as well. I mean, you could flip it that way too. But the point is, it is the basis of civilization is not economic transactions, as the Communist Manifesto argues. I'm not in favor of the bourgeois family criticized by the Communist Manifesto. I don't deny that families interact with economic realities, and that economic realities form and fashion our lives. I'm simply questioning what is at the bottom of the movement. That's the argument that I'm making. Let's be clear, families are born of blood. That's what makes a family, and that has been true no matter what the economic situation is. Because mothers die for their children all over the world, and have done so since the creation of man, and have never not done so regardless of the economic situation. Ladies and gentlemen, and this brings me on to another point of our argument that I want to make, is that the communists see political injustice and economic injustice in the world, and they call the world to revolution amongst the proletariat. They want, it is a doctrine and a philosophy of envy that seeks to pit the proletariat against those who are economically better. Christians are every bit as committed to creating a just society as the communists. We are, and we have. Christians abolished the slave trade. Christians gave women rights, because he was right in his description of the Roman family. Women were nothing in pagan Rome, but they became people in Christian Rome. Christians developed the idea that anyone is equal in Christ regardless of the colour of their skin, that slaves were equal to their masters at the agape feast of the church. Christians were the ones that abolished the gladiatorial system and the spectacle of feeding men to lions. Christians were the ones that outlawed murdering your slave because they were a person and not a piece of property. Christians were the ones that for 2,000 years have abolished slavery, something that keeps reoccurring because of economic injustice. And Christians today are still fighting against slavery. But Christians believe in reform, not revolution, because revolution will always give way to sin, give way to selfishness, in which, to quote Animal Farm, all animals are equals, but some are more equal than others. The revolution of the proletariat is destructive to society. Go and look at the Soviet bloc for evidence.
A little earlier, Bob was talking about the science of nature being God-driven, and we understand that God-driven nature because we understand God, if you will. We come to understand God, or attempt to understand God. Well, in reality, when Galileo confirmed the ideas of Copernicus that he proposed in the 14th century, when Galileo explained this, he was attacked by the church, not because of Bob, but attacked by the church because they said they had worked out the nature of the evidence in the universe. The universe was created by God, the earth was the center of the universe, and everything revolved around it. And for centuries, people had attempted to understand the world based on this approximation to reality. Where did this approximation come from? From the very thing we see in front of us now. The sun setting. Of course, the sun is not setting. The earth is moving. And yet, for thousands of years, or perhaps millions of years, human beings and our ancestors conceptualized the world in an attempt to approximate reality by saying that the sun is moving around the earth. It was natural for us to think this. Scientific method is about discovering things that perhaps appear to be natural and normal, not being so. Things that appear to be stable, not being so. So things that are fixed and stable, for example, again, you mentioned, I think it was family units again, born of blood. Born of blood was the argument. In fact, in many times in history, there have been group marriage. There are many communities around the world where you don't know, some communities don't know who the father is. There are matriarchal communities, even to this day, where all children call all the women mother. And the brothers are considered brothers. The men are brought in for procreation and expelled thereafter. We don't know then. Sometimes there are cases in some parts of the world where people have multiple partners and get pregnant and they don't know who the father is. And therefore, human sexual and social relations are not simply governed by a God-driven imperative. Human beings have been forged in their environment, in the interaction with their environmental circumstances. The modern world today uses a lot of words that are supposedly precise words for reality. And yet you see today, for example, in Israel, one person's terrorist is another one's murderer. One person's terrorist is another one's freedom fighter. And therefore what you get is, depending upon which interests are being discussed, we get a different interpretation of reality. America says the Israelis are fighting for their defense of their freedom. The Palestinians say they are fighting for freedom against the occupation of their lands. The interpretation of language depends upon the conditions, the circumstances, the interests at play. And therefore, I do not believe it is correct to have an ahistorical view of language, an ahistorical view of mathematics, as if it's something created by God, and all of us therefore are merely approximating God. We're approximating the universe, understanding of the universe, but we're also doing so based on particular interests of particular groups. How you doing?
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear, because Heiko has misheard me again. I have not said that human nature is driven by God. I said that human nature is driven by sin. That's what I said. And to this, I want to call you to the only true revolution, the only true path to which man can achieve justice in this world. And that is by submitting ourselves to Christ, by recognizing our own sinful nature, and by rebelling against that natural selfishness that at every stage and in every way can distort human behavior and can twist the way that we behave. But I want to be clear, I am not calling you to utopianism. That is the fallacy of Marxism. That's the fallacy of the Communist Manifesto. It promises you a lie in which every problem in society will be solved by the eventual establishment of communism, in which there will be no injustice. These are lies. Human beings are always and will always be in a spiritual war against their own selfishness. And it is only when we address that that we can truly begin to mitigate the problems and the injustices that we see in the world. It's only when we take seriously discipleship in Christ and love our neighbour as we love ourselves and seek the good that we want for ourselves, for our neighbour, that we can begin to mitigate the injustices of sin. These injustices can never be fully washed away. They're historical, institutional. They are rooted into every aspect of our lives. And so it's a constant clean-up job. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the church calls us to constant siempre reformanda, as opposed to revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, this true revolution, this true way of establishing justice is done when we join the church, when master and slave unite around the Eucharistic feast and recognize that all are made in the image of God and all share in an equal dignity. When we live out that reality, we seek to make it a reality in the world around us. Ladies and gentlemen, the communists call you to join the proletariat, but that proletariat is disappearing. Why? Because the economic conditions that gave rise to the proletariat are also disappearing. We are now in a post-industrial society in which, through constant reform, the lives of all have been lifted out of poverty. Is it a perfect system? No. Is it something that can't be criticized? No. Is there still work to be done? Yes. But ladies and gentlemen, communism has failed. The reason for communism are disappearing, but the church is still here. The church founded by Jesus Christ calls to make men and women saints unto God, and in their holiness transform the world around them, and the church has been succeeding in doing this for 2,000 years and will continue to succeed when the Communist Manifesto is long forgotten.
How many more you want to do?
We're
drawing to a close, aren't we?
Yeah. Do you want to do...
One more each?
Okay.
Yeah, one.
No, two more each.
Two?
Two more each. Done.
Or one longer one each.
All right. What, 8 minutes? And that's 2.
6.
All right. We're going to do 6 minutes each.
No, this one 4 I've got because I'm replying.
Okay.
And then thereafter...
So 4, 4 and then 6, 6.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The discussion about revolution, I don't know if it was a slip of the tongue, but it was an issue that was raised earlier about slavery. So Bob said the Christians got rid of slavery. But don't forget there was slavery in the United States of America under many Christian rulers. The presidents of the United States had slaves. There is more slavery in numerical terms today than there was even at the time of the United States slavery. And therefore the idea, I don't know if it was the slip of the tongue, that master and slave must come together, I think is wrong. I think the slave has the right to take action to abolish slavery. And those who agree with the abolition of slavery have the right to join hands with them to abolish slavery. And if that means challenging and overthrowing the physical power of the slave owners, then so be it. And that can be used as an analogy for this human condition around the world where you describe a world that I do not see. I do not see the alleviation of poverty around the world. On the contrary, particularly since 2020, poverty in the world has been skyrocketing. And in the last 30 years, 80% of poverty alleviation on the planet took place in the People's Republic of China, not elsewhere. The majority of the world suffered a decline in living standards. Even Britain, France, Germany, the United States of America, Switzerland, Sweden, the wealthiest countries in the world have been suffering a decline in living standards for the overwhelming majority of the population for the last 10 years or since 2008. So this is a myth that capitalism is raising the living standards of the people. The idea that the proletariat, the working classes who live by selling their labour power, their ability to work for a period of time, every week for a wage, the idea that they are declining in number, I think is totally inaccurate. They are increasing in number. In Africa, in Asia, in China, in India, the number of working class people selling their ability to work on the marketplace, looking for someone who will employ them, working on something that is not theirs. What they make is not theirs. What they do is not theirs. Their creativity, their energy, their effort, their love, that doesn't go towards producing what they want. It goes towards producing what the capitalists, the owners of the means to produce wealth, the owners of the land, the owners of industry, the owners of the machinery, the owners of the banks, the owners of the insurance companies, and by the way, those who dominate the politics of the entire planet. They control what happens with the resources of the earth, the physical resources, and the human ability to make things. And rather than being controlled by those ruling classes, by BlackRock, by Vanguard, by Barclays, by the big multinationals, by the arms industry, by the pharmaceutical industry, and partly by the church who invest in them, rather than that, human beings, in my opinion, and I believe that is the great endearing message of the Communist Manifesto, just as there are endearing messages in the Bible, the endearing message that will maintain the permanence of the influence of the Manifesto is that it is a cry to the working people of the world to take control of what they do with their labour and organise the world for the benefit of the overwhelming majority of humanity.
So, ladies and gentlemen, no one is denying that there are economic injustices that must be dealt with. As a Christian, I want to see a world in which people are not trapped in poverty. We're doing 4 minutes, 4 minutes. So I want to see a world in which... I'll just stop until you've reset the clock.
I thought it was 6.
No, it's 4 minutes, 4 minutes.
4 then.
Did you just do 6?
I did 4.
Right, so it's 4 minutes, 4 minutes, then 6 minutes, 6 minutes.
These are 6.
Okay.
Well, another.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't deny that there are economic injustices that we should deal with. But the question is, what's the best way to deal with them? The Communist Manifesto encourages us to be men of violence, to envy those who are better than ourselves, and to take control of the means of production through an act of force. But we have real world experience of what that leads to. Look at the communist world everywhere in the world. It has led to failure. It has led to destruction. It has led to death. 20 million Christians died in the Soviet Union. Christians are being arrested in their thousands in communist China. And for what crime? Because they aren't communists and they won't worship the Communist Party. That's what communism leads to, when you decide that the ideology is more important than the human person. Ladies and gentlemen, masters and slaves, the bourgeois and the proletariat must work together to alleviate the poor. You do this by changing their heart, by changing their attitude. In other words, by making them saints, ladies and gentlemen. He talked about the slavery in America, but he forgot to tell you that those American slave owners gave revised Bibles to their slaves. Why? Because the Bible inspired the destruction of the slave trade, and the people knew it. And so you can go and see slave Bibles where they've taken out entire chapters, words, verses and books, precisely because they feared its revolutionary idea that slaves and masters were equal. Ladies and gentlemen, all economic systems, whether you're a capitalist or a communist, all of them fail when they are critiqued from the perspective of the environment. I am not a capitalist. Capitalism will fail because it does not value nature, and it sees nature as only valuable insofar as it meets the needs of man. The problem is, communism shares that understanding of nature. But as a Christian, I am committed to the belief that God said that the world was good, before he created man, and so nature has a dignity separate and independent from the nature of man. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, all of our economic systems are failing, and they all will fail until we recognize the intrinsic dignity of the world around us, and that we recognize that the otter has as much right to the river as the town. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we need to start building a new economics, and it is neither capitalist nor communist. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, if the ecosystem collapses under our feet, it will not matter whether you are a communist or a capitalist. You will starve all the same. You will die of sunstroke all the same. We need to move beyond this debate, because the issue we face is far greater, which is the collapse of the ecology under the weight of industry. Let's do 6 minutes.
I don't want to do another 4 minutes.
You do 6 minutes and I'll do 6 minutes and we're done. You all right?
Yeah. So, firstly about revolution. Well, we both talked about revolution. He's talking about what he believes is a Christian revolution, which he thinks will remove the sins of man and make human beings more closely in relation to their maker, and that this will, if you like, alleviate the problems on earth. I'm not sure if that means that everyone in the world is supposed to eventually adopt Christianity. I don't know if that's what the argument is. But if it is, well, good luck to you. I don't see it happening, but good luck to you. You probably don't see anything I'm arguing happening. So be it. We're talking about ideas about how human beings can live on this earth. We're not talking about what God told us to do. We're talking about how we think ourselves in this world, living in real conditions. And those real conditions give rise, under capitalism, to the most grotesque inequality in the history of humanity. 8 individuals, this was several years back, it's worse now, 8 individuals own more wealth than half of the world's population. So the idea that poverty alleviation has resulted, it hasn't. There is more inequality in the world today than ever before in human history, and it is accelerating as a consequence of the accumulation of the technology, of weapons, of computers, of artificial intelligence, of pharmaceuticals, of chemicals, of bacteriological sciences, and also, by the way, of those who proclaim themselves to be the defenders of the ecology. Beware when people tell you they are about to defend the whole of humanity with their economic activity. Beware of those who tell you they are protecting the planet. Beware of those who tell you they are protecting the environment. What they are actually doing as we speak is they are organizing to seize control of nature, to privatize nature, to pretend to you that you should not travel anymore. You should be restricted in your movement, because otherwise you will destroy the planet. You shouldn't use what God gave to man, the oil, the gas, the resources under the earth, which have existed for millions of years and are constantly being reproduced by the dynamics of the internal motion and matter of nature under the earth. These are the resources given to us by the universe that we can use for the benefit of humanity. But some people, those who own, those who control the wealth of the world, those who control the banks, the largest companies, 140 companies, control 40% of the wealth of the world. 780 companies, the world's largest, own and control 80% of the wealth of the planet. Those thousands of people who run those companies, 10, 20,000 people, and their hangers-on, They shape the destiny of humanity, but not consciously. They don't shape it according to some grand design, some great plan. They've got several plans, many plans, all of which are to the detriment of humanity. The primary objective they have is the accumulation of capital, the destruction of the opponent, the creation of companies that dominate the entire world, and billionaires who exercise control over this world. They seek to expand their power, to maintain their authority, and to use all the weapons at their disposal: technological, scientific, economic, political, and, as we can see in the last 3 weeks, military, to maintain their wealth and power to the detriment of the overwhelming majority of humanity to this day. And that applies, by the way, not only to Christians or to communists or to atheists or to agnostics, but to any religion, to people of any religion, of any belief, Christian or not, believer in God or not. All of us suffer as a consequence of us not having control over what is done with our labour, what we do with our creativity, with our love, with our energy. We do not control what we do, what we make, as Isaiah in the Bible says, what they made with their fingers. We do not control what we made with our fingers. And by the way, the reason why Bob is here, why the Islamic preachers are here, why the Christian preachers are here, is because the Christian church and the Islamic faith, they are governed by people who do not serve the interests of their own people. The reason Bob's here is because he believes the church is not serving the people who are Christians. And therefore, I believe that the answer that working people of the world should take over the running of society corresponds with the interests of Christians and people of other faiths, as well as people of no faith. Thank you very much.
Final 6 minutes. I was really hoping he was going to say, workers of the world, unite! All you have to lose are your chains. So I'm a bit disappointed that he didn't say that.
You've done it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that communism has failed in its own terms. Communism has failed to create a proletariat. Communism has failed to bring about the revolution. Communism, even when it had momentary success, has only brought destruction and failure to the societies where it has dominated. But the church has succeeded in its own terms, because in every generation the church raises up saints. And what do those saints do? They fight for the poor and the oppressed. And they have done that for 2,000 years, and they are still doing it today. And I join with Heiko in raising up awareness about the plight of the poor. But the solution to the plight of the poor, ladies and gentlemen, is not in revolution. It is not in a dialectic of envy and violence. It is a rigid, stern, firm commitment to the transformation of society, inch by inch, centimetre by centimetre, policy by policy, rule by rule, that elevates the poor out of their deprivation. But ladies and gentlemen, the reality is that as a Christian, I am not committed to any economic system. The church lived in an economic system of slavery, of feudalism, of industrialization, of post-industrialization, of Soviet communism, and in all of those economic systems, it raised saints that worked for the betterment of the people that were around them, because they were inspired by their love for their neighbor. Ladies and gentlemen, to establish that sense of justice that our hearts naturally yearn for, which again demonstrates that it's not Feuerbachkian materialism, but we yearn naturally for this non-physical reality we call justice. It is because our hearts yearn for the reality of God, from which all justice flows like a river. And so by embodying him in our lives and becoming saints in his holy church, then and only then are we properly equipped to bring about the only true revolution. Not revolution against economic systems, but revolution against the selfishness in our own hearts. That selfishness that prizes our side over theirs. And communism leans in to that selfishness and inspires you to buy into that selfishness. Ladies and gentlemen, I agree with his criticism of the economic campaigners of today. That campaign has been hijacked by people that are abusing it for their own selfish interest, thus demonstrating once again another evidence to the fact that we are naturally selfish, and that is the root of our problems. A problem we cannot solve. It is a problem that we can only mitigate through discipleship in the way of Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, to be a saint is to be a true revolutionary, but he's not a revolutionary of violence. It is a revolutionary of love, transformative love of yourselves, of your families, of your communities, of your society, and of the economic system itself. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an act of will to lift the poor out of their poverty. It is an act of will that the communists want to achieve through violence. But if you're willing to kill your neighbor, you've already lost. And the communists have already lost. The paradigm of our economics has already shifted beyond the debate of the communist state versus the capitalist economic system. What looms on the horizon is ecological collapse. And that is what we must now find an economy for. And we should not allow self-interested parties to capture that debate for their own selfish interest, and I would stand with Heiko against them. Ladies and gentlemen, the liberals say that we should be free to have private property to be used towards private ends. The communists tell you that we should have public property that is organized towards public ends. I want to tell you as a Christian that we should have private property and that we should be inspired to use that private property for the common good. And what is the common good? The common good is that good that when it is divided, it is not diminished. And we should use our private property to create social and economic justice. That we should create a society that is not dominated by self-interest, where we favor not-for-profit businesses over profit-making businesses. The real choice that is laid before you is between discipleship in Christ or discipleship in Marx. And I leave it to you in good conscience to decide which will work and which will be better.
Thank you very much.
I want to give Heiko a gift. Yeah, I want to give him a gift.
A signed Bible.
Nope. You've got a Bible, right?
I've got a Bible.
Right, this is not a Bible.
I was given a Bible in the police station.
Really?
I kept it.
Nice.
But he said keep it.
Great. Right. Here's a gift for Heiko. How can we create a just society? That's my gift to you. God bless.
Thank you. Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Great. I wish Speaker's Corner was like this every Sunday.
Work to be done.
Yeah. If anyone wants to ask me any questions, I'll be over by that fence so Heiko can get on with whatever he's doing. So if you want to ask any questions, I'll be over there.